Since I first watched Adventure Time, there have been so many characters in the show that I wish had something more, but one in particular that I felt could have gotten so much more was Susan. Susan is one of those early characters that I felt could have been a Marceline, someone who really rose up to be a main character at the end of the day, but as the show rolled on, they eventually did give her a spotlight in the Islands miniseries. I could make a whole video about why I think she deserved more, but I feel like that would be an injustice to the actual character that she has that honestly is really good and really compelling. And I think her character and her story delves into a lot of really interesting stuff that no other character in the entire series does. So I wanted to talk about that, and I just want to give a warning. This video is going to be relatively heavy since it's going to be talking about the concept of indoctrination. I think that this idea is just really interesting as a whole, and something that the show really delved into when they really didn't need to, especially because PB could have easily slid in for this indoctrination viewpoint and kind of did, in my opinion, through the use of Banana Guard 16, but having this be the viewpoint for the human society I felt was especially interesting. Hopefully you enjoy, and if you do, consider sticking around. It would be really appreciated. Before we talk about how Susan was indoctrinated into human society, we need to know how human society actually worked. The way that human society works on Founders Island, Hub Island, and the many other islands is that they think that safety and sticking together is the most important thing, bar none. You have to like living in safety and living in harmony with one another, or else you're just going to be ostracized for having different mindsets and different ideologies. Obviously, you want to be in tune with everyone else, and if you're not, there must be something wrong with you. In human society, they actually have a thing called re-education, which all of the people who try to leave the society, known as hiders, are placed. Susan, luckily enough, was a very specific viewpoint into the society as someone known as a seeker, people who specifically go after those with those different mindsets and bring them back forcefully using their own physique, which is why Susan is so absurdly buff throughout the entire series. Her body is literally physically changed permanently by her interaction with the society. As we see her do these lessons to be a seeker, we immediately see her become more muscular without literally doing anything. She just has something injected into her that makes her better in terms of how the society views her. She's more useful to them, therefore she is seen as better to them, and Susan being the literal teacher's pet for Dr. Gross was even more telling of how far she was pushed into the society, seen as the ultimate example of what a seeker should be, and I think that's what makes her friendship with Frida, someone who specifically wants to leave, so compelling. She's best friends with someone who doesn't fit in at all and feels ostracized ever since she was a little girl. And lastly, we have to talk about the human society's main use of idealization, the Founders. Because they basically destroyed the world, they decided they need to ensure that everyone stays safe in one location, and most importantly, in my opinion, doesn't think about all the bad things that they've done. I do think that the founders of Founders Island being deified in such a way that there are not only songs about them in schools for children, but the way they are personified in their society has this sort of otherworldly, ethereal nature to it. The way they're able to make these human beings turn into something beyond human because of what they're meant to represent is very true to life, in my opinion. And I think the use of music here is really, really cool, because in many episodes that Susan is in, obviously including her first one, she seems to have a sort of affinity for music, which is really cool because retroactively, they made her really like music when she was a kid by really liking this Founder song. She is so completely focused on what this world is supposed to be, that when Frida talks to her about seeing the rest of the world and all the other people that must be out there, she dismisses her, saying it's impossible, which eventually leads to her having very conflicting feelings on how people are supposed to live in the world at all. Frida's her best friend. Shouldn't her best friend be in the right for having these thoughts? Well, apparently not, because Dr. Gross immediately then says that Susan must have heard some preaching from some hider. But Susan clearly doesn't think Frida's wrong because of the conflicting feelings she has about letting her friend go and do what she wants. She clearly wants her friend to be happy, and knows that in this type of place, she's not going to be happy. Susan brings up a really great point about people having a specific best way for them to live, and I think this is a really great point to bring up. Susan is very young at this point in the story, and having her have these conflicting feelings shows that she's a lot more emotionally mature than a lot of the adults in their society, because they're so blindsided into believing what the founders want that they aren't actually willing to do anything that is new, innovative, or interesting. This is what leads to the culmination of her having this completely new life after she's sent out to find Finn as an infant. And obviously, this goes horribly awry. She loses all her memory and then is stuck with a bunch of fish people known as the humans. And it's honestly kind of crazy how Susan becoming an amnesiac is literally probably the best thing that could have ever happened to her, because she was so brainwashed into thinking what the founders wanted that she literally needed a full reset in order to realize that there's so much more to this world, and even if it is dangerous, it's something new, and it's something to learn, it's something to understand, which the founders would never do, because anything that's new is dangerous to them because they don't understand it. And that's the main point Frida brought up time and time again. Finn is obviously the perfect example of this. He's a human who's lived completely in Ooo his entire life, so he doesn't even know a world that Founders Island has, so his world is the normal world. Danger and all, he loves it for what it is. And that's what I think makes Susan's character development really interesting, because when she first comes out from the underground, she's overstimulated to the max by literally everything. Grass, people, trees, animals. She's never seen any of it apparently, and that's the best part. She actually learns what things are and understands what things are and grows as a person through these new experiences. And while she could just have it implemented into her head through some learning tube, her being in the moment and learning things allows her to help other people learn them immediately. Instead of having a machine teach you something, you're teaching other people something, and they will teach other people, and so on, until that thing that was seen as dangerous and unknown becomes normal, because normal is only what the society says is normal. Susan's second appearance is in the episode Butopia, which was personally one of my favorite episodes of the entire show, but I think the best part of this episode, obviously, is the mystery of who Susan is. Is she a human? Is she a fish person? She wants Finn to stay because she's just like Finn. Is Finn more like her than they realize? So much mystery at the end of this episode. Eventually, we do come back to Susan, which was a really, really great episode called Dark Purple. I feel like a lot of people don't really know about this episode, and that led to an even crazier question. Yeah, she's human, but what's this implant in her head? There's so much more mystery now. Who is Susan? And it adds another sense of mystery on top of what we know. We actually see a full flashback and arc with Susan, which I've already talked about. But not only is she able to enunciate just like she did in the past, but she has all the memories she did in the past as well. She remembers Frida, she remembers everything about Founders Island, she remembers Finn's mom. When we eventually reach Founders Island, a lot of stuff hits the fan. Finn meeting his mom, her backstory, and obviously Susan meeting Frida for the first time in many, many years. And Frida is in complete disbelief. Susan apologizes very, very wholeheartedly to Frida. She realized that there is so much more out there, but Frida says that she doesn't feel bad about it because she realized that the founders were correct. Throughout their entire lives, Susan was seen as the epitome of what Founders Island was. What they should act like, what they should be like, what they should look like. I could go on, but Frida never fit into anything. She always made fun of the stuff that Founders Island made. She even made fun of their entire culture, with the Founders song being seen as something dorky. Susan, inadvertently, was the one who destroyed Frida's one and only way of escaping. This scene perfectly encapsulates everything wrong with the human society in Adventure Time. Frida wants to live and do her own thing, but because they don't want anyone to be out of line, she's getting punished for it. But it's not just her who's being punished. Susan, who's actively tried to fit into the society her entire life, is now seen as a victim as well, having her entire mind erased right in front of her and being forced to destroy her best friend's only means of escape. Both of these two are being punished, so to say, but I think that Susan having her personality ripped away is a much harsher and more blunt way of viewing how these people actually view the people around them. They only view Susan and all the other Seekers as tools and experiments and objects that they can use in order to enact their will onto other people who don't fit in. And I think that's so disgusting. She was such an optimistic, overwhelmingly joyful little girl who wanted to do this more than anything, but in their eyes she's just another tool they can use to enact the Founder's will and ensure that everything stays the same. And I know that Adventure Time gets to some pretty intense themes from time to time, but I would definitely say this specific scene is one of the wildest in the entire show when it comes to the just darkness and horrific nature of it, showing how gritty and unrelentingly evil the world can really be. She was probably sent to re-education. She was probably told countless times that her way of thinking was wrong, but eventually she just accepted it, working at a toy store, accepting that she has to live in this mundanity that she doesn't like, constantly living in the what might have been mindset instead of living in the moment. Susan knows that Frida isn't like this. Frida is supposed to be someone who's rebellious in a way, always doing whatever she wants. And now that she sees that she is so complacent that she's just given up, she feels terrible. Luckily, Finn had a pretty rousing speech and was able to convince her that she can live how she wants to live. Susan was searching for Finn, and Finn being brought back is what allowed Frida to realize that she can also leave and do the same thing. Instead of just staying in one place and feeling complacent and comfortable, they're able to expand and find new things in the world and go on an adventure, dare I say. And lastly, I wanted to talk about what I think is a really fantastic moment when, while Kara and Frida are about to travel off to see what else is in the world, Susan then says, "I think I like Susan better," and Frida immediately just accepts that Kara is now Susan. Her getting rid of the name Kara is essentially her getting rid of this past. Sure, it is a part of her, no doubt, but the fact that she's accepting Susan, something that was given to her relatively recently in her life as her real name because of all these new experiences she's had, I think is really poetic in a way. That's going to be it for me. I just am really passionate about this topic, and I just think it's really, really compelling how the show is able to tell a story about such a serious topic in a pretty graceful way, in my opinion. As I said, I think Susan's a character that definitely could have gotten a lot more love throughout the series. I think she had a lot of potential and definitely lived up to a really, really great character at the end of the day, but I wish there was more still, because there can always be more great writing for great characters. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, consider supporting the channel and sticking around, and that'll be it from me. Hope you guys take care and have a good one.